Now, the Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, hinted that military action was imminent, warning enough is enough. And that was after carrier-based jets and destroyers in the Red Sea had to shoot down a barrage of drones and missiles launched from Yemen. So what can we expect? How dangerous a moment is this? Let's talk to Lord Owen, former British Foreign Secretary and Naval Minister. Good evening to you. Thanks for joining us.
Good evening.
Now, we've heard from the Times political editor, that's Stephen Swinford, that the UK is expected to be engaging in military action tonight on Houthi positions where drone strikes have been launched from. What's your reaction?
I think it's become very necessary to take action. We warned that we can't sit back and watched the international shipping interfered with from the Yemen, and the Suez Canal must be held open. Already we are seeing a large number of ships going around the Cape. This is both expensive and time-consuming.
What about the risks versus the reward? The reward being to allow the safe passage of shipping in international lanes. What about the risks?
I don't think there are great risks. I mean, they obviously have got very good Iranian guided missiles and drones, so they are well equipped. And there's always the chance that our defenses, which are pretty good in our naval vessels, will be, for some reason, broken through, and it might strike one of our ships. So that's our biggest risk. And let's hope that's minimalized, and I think it probably is. And we'll be operating with American ships, and each one can also put a cover over the other. So we're not entirely dependent on one ship's self-defense. There will be a sort of area defense. And I think that's the right way to operate with the U.S. Navy. And if there are other countries' navies that want to join in, all well and good.
What does it say about the position or the attitude of the Houthis and their Iranian backers that they've continued to strike and indeed to seize ships? And now we've had 27 strikes since the 19th of November, despite the increasingly loud warnings from Britain and the US and that resolution at the UN Security Council last night.
They want the attention of the world. They want to feel that they're a big, influential country. They're not, but they are critically placed, and they do have Iran as their principal ally, and they are prepared to supply them with weapons of a great degree of sophistication. So we have to recognize that we're attacking a country that is well equipped by Iran in self-defense as well as in attack. So it's not an easy strike. It may sound, who are they, Houthi rebels? They're not a big country, they're not a big armament, but they have got good weapons designed to be able to penetrate our defenses and shoot our aircraft down. So this is not a minor mission and shouldn't be undertaken irresponsibly. And the governments have waited, they have warned, they've given ample evidence that they're going to respond if this continues. And the United States have done the same. Every sign that we are at all fours with the Americans and the Pentagon.
The Prime Minister hasn't waited to debate this in Parliament, which you've seen on previous such occasions, and some Labour left-wingers like John McDonnell and John Trickett and Afsana Begum, they say this is a foolish thing. They want to debate it in Parliament fully, but instead the Prime Minister has briefed the Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, of course, Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, and the Shadow Defence Secretary, John Healey. Do you think that's right? Is that the right way to go about things?
Look, you're dealing with a military operation, and you are dealing with it with allies, and in the case of the United States, a very powerful ally. Therefore, you are, to some extent, going to be dependent on when they want to go and when they're ready to go. And I think you've got to take account of that. Of course, the House of Commons is important, and they should be kept fully briefed, and the official opposition, the Labour Party, should be treated to privy information and informed about what's happening. But I certainly don't think you should postpone action if it looks sensible to do it this evening. to postpone that because you haven't been able to come to the House of Commons. They can come and make a statement tomorrow if they wish.
How important is it for this coalition or this anticipated strike not to look like a Western group of countries attacking an impoverished Muslim country, even if the people in charge are not the internationally recognized government of Yemen? They're Houthis, who see themselves now as the legitimate government. So we've got Britain and the US, but there are other countries like Australia, Bahrain, Belgium, Canada, the Saudis. How important is it for them to also join this action?
Well, the Saudis seem to have indicated that they're in favor of this action. But you can't expect a lot of these countries to speak out. This is not a good time for them to come to our support because of what's going on in Gaza. And, you have to see the Iranians are not stupid. They are, if you like, hotting the situation up in the full knowledge that the Muslim world is extremely angry with Israel and therefore, by relationships in the past, angry with any country that has got good relations with Israel, but of course predominantly the United States, but also Britain. So, of course, it's inconvenient for us. It would be much better for this to be dealt with. In fact, you could argue it should have been dealt with earlier. That's why I think you just can't pick and choose your timing. And they're doing this deliberately. Yes, we've got to be very careful. And the last thing we want to do is to allow this to trigger an attack from Hezbollah into Israel. That may
Well, that's the risk, isn't it?
Consequences.
Well, that's the risk, isn't it? Because of course, if these strikes don't just Lord Owen, if these strikes don't just
you can't avoid them, and there are consequences. And at this stage, Iran is playing all these different areas, taking this tanker in the Gulf. They're hotting up the atmosphere because they know we are vulnerable, because they want to paint us responsible for Gaza. We are not responsible for Gaza in any sense at all. Neither the United States nor Britain has done anything to involve the very depressing situation in Gaza. If anything, we've done our best to try and persuade the Israelis to stop what's happening in Gaza. And in my view, they have overreached themselves in Gaza. And they, of course, had a right to take out Hamas's forces. But I read somewhere the other day somebody saying we have the right to interfere with the water supplies in Gaza. The Israelis have the right. They do not have the right to interfere with water supplies in Gaza. And they are in grave danger of taking steps in Gaza, which is infuriating a lot of countries who should normally be very much on their side.
As the South Africans have made clear at the International Court of Justice today. Lord Owen, thank you very much indeed. Well, at last night's UN Security Council debate, there was unanimous condemnation of the Houthi attacks, but also warnings against further escalation. Let's talk to David Sedney, former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Afghanistan, Pakistan and Central Asia. David, you served in the Barack Obama administration. Thanks for joining us on the program.
Thanks for having me.
Now, yesterday, the Houthi leader, Abdel Malik al-Houthi, said any American attack will not remain without a response. The response will be greater than the attack that was carried out with 20 drones and a number of missiles. How seriously will the U.S. take this warning?
Well, I think the United States takes it quite seriously, and the fact that the Houthis have a variety of asymmetric ways to respond has restrained the U.S. and others from going directly after the source of the Houthi missile and drone firings. That's what of particular importance is the fact that the Houthis could, as they have in the past, respond against Saudi Arabia and the Saudi oil fields, which would be a further escalation of the entire conflict. So the Houthis have a lot of cards, asymmetric cards, and make it difficult for the U.S. And its allies to do anything substantive to prevent these attacks from occurring.
Both the US and Britain have been warning of a response over the past few days, in fact, week or so. Why do you think they've decided that tonight might be the night?
Well, I think the scale of the Houthi attacks and the fact that shipping continues to be restricted in the Gulf is of great concern. And once having committed to this task force, the U.S., the U.K., and the other sort of many of them unnamed allies who were there feel they need to get a return on their commitment. But it's going to be very difficult to do anything that affects the Houthis in any significant way.
Well, indeed, not least because there's been bombing in that country. Of course, Saudi was supporting the official recognized government, and then the Houthis were being supported by Iran, and the Houthis and the Saudi-supported administration seem to have fought themselves to a standstill and to a stalemate. There's a sort of ceasefire, but that might be destroyed by what comes tonight and in the coming days.
Very much a danger. And again, the impact would not just be on the shipping in the Gulf, but it could potentially be on Saudi Arabia and the Saudi Arabian oil fields, which would really move this thing to a whole other realm of conflicts. So this is a very careful balancing act that the U.S., the U.K. have to play. And as I said before, the Houthis have a lot of asymmetric responses that make this a challenge.
President Biden is expected to address the nation later tonight. What do you think he should say?
Well, he's going to have to explain why the U.S. is using military force in a place far from the U.S., in a place that doesn't, and you can argue, doesn't really immediately impact American security interest, because most of the traffic that's going through the Red Sea is actually headed to Europe. So there's a lot of skepticism in the U.S. about the use of military force in this area.
And do you think part of the reason that the Houthis and Iran feel so emboldened to continue these strikes and these interventions, despite the warning from Britain, America, and others, that they don't take these Western countries seriously?
Well, the Western countries were de facto supporters of the Saudis. The Saudis tried very hard to defeat the Houthis and failed. And so from the Houthis' perspective, the indirect might of the United States was already brought against them once, and as you said, they fought to a standstill with the Saudis, who were fighting with American weapons. So the Houthis feel very emboldened right now, and there's anything that's going to impact them. It's hard to see what's going to seriously impact the Houthis.
The politicians here in this country, on the political left, are calling for de-escalation. What does de-escalation look like? Is it not possible without a response, first of all, and then pause to see what the Houthis and the Iranians do?
It's very difficult to see what de-escalation would look like because the U.S. and its allies have not escalated yet. They have been playing purely defense out in the Gulf. So until the U.S. can come up with something that impacts the Houthis, and as I said, I have a hard time believing that they're going to actually be able to do that, then I don't think de-escalation is a path that's possible.
Quick question about the Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. There was talk of his health. He had an operation, didn't tell the White House, but the president is standing foursquare behind him. A bizarre episode, whichever way you look at it. What do you make of it?
It's quite strange. It's not consistent with the kind of openness and transparency the Biden administration had promised the U.S. Apparently, General Austin is a very private person, and that's run up against this promise of transparency. So far, the president has stood by him, but certainly both the Secretary of Defense personally and the institution of the Department of Defense has lost credibility and standing in the United States, not to mention outside.
All right. David Sedney, former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Times Radio. This is Henry Bonsu with you live on a Thursday evening. It's the 11th of January, 23 minutes past 10. You can text us 87222. Start your message with the word Times in response to that breaking news about impending action in the Gulf. Still to come.